Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to the World Leaders Forum and the Gabriel Silver Memorial Lecture. I'm John Coatsworth, Dean of the Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. Columbia President Lee Bollinger created the World Leaders Forum in 2003 as a university-wide initiative to provide an opportunity for members of the Columbia community to engage in lively and substantive dialogue with the extraordinary men and women who are shaping the world we all live in. Each year, especially during the opening sessions of the UN General Assembly, Columbia invites a series of major figures, often heads of state and government, to present their views and respond to questions from our students and faculty. This week alone has brought the presidents of Argentina and Serbia, the former president of Finland, himself a Nobel Peace Laureate, and the prime ministers of Nepal and Thailand. The Gabriel Silver Memorial Lectures were inaugurated in 1950 at what was then the School of International Affairs, today's SIPA, by then University President Dwight Eisenhower. The lectureship was established by Leo Silver in memory of his father Gabriel to foster international understanding and world peace. Past Silver lecturers have included President Eisenhower himself and such exceptional leaders as Sir Anthony Eden, Pierre Mendès France, Willy Brandt, Lee Kuan Yew, Rajiv Gandhi, and Madeleine Albright. Today's speaker, as you know, is former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. He will be introduced in a moment by President Bollinger. Before calling President Bollinger to the podium, however, I want to add a particularly warm welcome to our speaker, whom I first met some years ago when he visited Harvard University in 1998, and then again in 2004 as commencement speaker. In his commencement speech in 2004, Kofi Annan spoke of the need for, quote, enlightened American leadership, and asked, quote, what kind of world would it be and who would want to live in it if every country was allowed to use force without collective agreement simply because it thought there might be a threat? What kind of a world indeed? Kofi Annan's forthright courage and eloquence, his commitment to peaceful resolution of conflicts, and his tireless labor on behalf of sustainable, equitable, and democratic development have inspired me, as they have countless millions throughout the globe. Now, it gives me great pleasure to call to the podium the creator of the World Leaders Forum and so much that has made Columbia the even greater institution it is today, President Lee Bollinger.
It is the highest of pleasures for me to introduce Kofi Annan, now a member of the Columbia community, as the first global fellow of the university and the School of International and Public Affairs to deliver this year's Gabriel Silver Memorial Lecture. I know that Kofi counts it among his greatest honors and responsibilities to help young people find ways to enter global public service, and we are enormously pleased that our students will be among those included in that very special group. Let me begin by noting that Kofi's appointment as a Global Fellow is only the most recent highlight of a long-time friendship with Columbia and many of the people within this university. During his dynamic tenure as UN Secretary General, which included 2 terms spanning the years of 1997 to 2006, he often came to speak on our campus and always left us better informed, more enlightened, and armed with new and innovative and reasoned approaches to many of the world's most pressing problems. Since leaving the UN, he has continued to press for better policies to meet the needs of the poorest and the most vulnerable, particularly in Africa. He has also continued to use his experience to mediate and resolve international conflicts. In Kenya in early 2008, Mr. Annan led the African Union's panel of eminent African personalities to help find a peaceful resolution to the post-election violence. In addition to his work with the Kofi Annan Foundation, he serves as the chairman of the African Progress Panel, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, the Prize Committee of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and Concordia 21, and as president of the Global Humanitarian Forum. During his tenure as UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan was a constant advocate of human rights, the rule of law, the Millennium Development Goals, the Global Fund, and Africa. In 2001, he and the United Nations were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for, quote, their work for a better organized and more peaceful world. Leadership is an elusive quality and elusive to describe. More than anything else, it may be said that Kofi has a gift of leadership. And as Secretary General, he uniquely provided the world with a moral and ethical compass that will last for generations. From my perspective, this quality begins with one's own close and personal relationships. As someone who feels and knows firsthand the sustaining and improving benefits of having the best spouse in the world, meaning my wife, Jean, I know that Annan, who is here with us today as well, is integral to everything that Kofi has accomplished. To give just one example, Jean and I will never forget the capacities of both Kofi and Nan to express empathetically for all the world the horror and sadness of the human devastation wrought by the tsunami in Southeast Asia. Today, Kofi will talk about an issue that concerns all of us and that has been of increasing interest to many people at Columbia, the impact of global climate change. At the Earth Institute, at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, the Center for Children's Environmental Health at the Mailman School of Public Health, and at so many other centers and institutes across the campus, including the new Climate Center, Columbia researchers are playing key roles in expanding our understanding of climate change and its impact on the world. Kofi Annan has been sounding the alarm about the dangers of climate change for a long time. And just this past May, under the auspices of the Global Humanitarian Forum, he released a report on the devastating human effects of climate change. In December, the United Nations will, of course, hold a major climate change conference in Copenhagen to try to work out an international agreement on limiting greenhouse gases. This may be the last chance of the world at heading off a global catastrophe. Kofi Annan will certainly be at the center of action. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me the greatest pleasure to bring to the podium one of the world's great humanitarian statesmen and leaders, Kofi Annan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, President Bollinger, for those very warm words. And Dean Cosworth. And it's really wonderful to be here and to see so many students here. And I would also want to acknowledge some of the old friends and colleagues who are in the hall here with me. Apart from your president, I see Professor Doyle, I see Ocampo, I see Jean-Marie Guéhenno, who headed the peacekeeping operation. I see Tim Allen from London and quite a few other friends. If I have missed anybody, I'm not ignoring you, you are still a friend. Let me say that it is indeed a great honor to be asked to be a global fellow at Columbia, and I accepted it when the president asked me to do it with alacrity and with great joy, knowing what this institution has to offer and the work you do here. And I'm also pleased that I've been invited to give the Gabriel Silver Memorial Lecture. When I look at the distinguished roll call of previous speakers, it underlines the prestige of today's occasion. The first address was given by Dwight Eisenhower. At the time, this university's before he became President of the United States in 1950. His wide-ranging speech was very much a product of his own military experience and the start of the Cold War. But what stood out for me were the fundamental elements necessary for a peaceful future, which he listed: justice and freedom of opportunity for all men, international understanding, disarmament, and a respected United Nations. I'm quoting Dwight Eisenhower. These same fundamentals provide the backdrop today for my speech on global leadership. This is a field in which Colombia has a remarkable reputation. I am particularly grateful for the tremendous intellectual and scientific support that this university provided to the UN Millennium Project, which I launched as Secretary General. You have produced leaders not just for this country, as the present occupant of the White House indicates, but also across the globe. In a decade in an age in which borders restrict neither opportunities nor threats, the sense of global community that Colombia strives to teach is more important than ever. It is one of these global challenges, I believe the greatest of modern times, and the test of leadership it provides to all of us, that I want to address today. Climate change is, of course, not the only grave threat we face. Conflict, famine, disease, and the scandal of over 1 billion people living on less than $1 a day should spur all of us to action. Each of these conflicts will be made worse by climate change. More severe droughts, for example, are turning farmland into desert, provoking conflict over scarce resources such as water. Rising sea levels will flood some of the world's most productive farmlands, causing food shortages, and may displace millions of people, mostly in poor countries. Increasing temperatures are accelerating the spread of disease to new areas and new populations. We know that, no, let me back up. Indeed, climate change risks becoming the main restraint on development, reversing significant progress being made towards the achievement of Millennium Development Goals and other objectives. More work is needed. I know the President referred to the work done by Global Humanitarian Forum and our report on human impact of climate change. But I believe more work is needed to anticipate and measure climatic changes and their impact so that they can be managed. But it is clear that some impacts are already unavoidable and that change is happening at a much faster pace than predicted. We know that unless we act quickly to arrest rising temperatures, climate change will become irreversible and catastrophic. The report which we issued this summer by the Global Humanitarian Forum on human impact of climate change documented the damaging, often disastrous effects of climate change on hundreds of thousands of people, overwhelmingly in the poorest groups, in the poorest countries. This was a message from the president of Kiribati, who attended the conference we organized in Geneva. And I quote, when he complained about how his country is being swamped by rising sea levels, I quote him, he says, "We will have to leave our islands. We thought we had a century to think about it. but the time frame is becoming ever shorter. Time is running out. It is why yesterday's summit by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, was such an important and necessary step, and why I urge leaders of the G20 to catalyze the growing momentum on climate change. They are responsible for the vast majority of global greenhouse emissions. Agreement among them in Pittsburgh will go a long way towards the success of the Copenhagen conference, and I hope they will not miss this opportunity. Even though there is now widening agreement among all political leaders that deep cuts are needed in global greenhouse gas emissions, this has not led to the tough political decisions and radical actions needed to address the challenge. This is deeply worrying. It is essential, in advance of the Copenhagen meeting in December, to create the political momentum required for complex and detailed negotiations to succeed. By success, I mean establishing a strong political framework for ambitious cooperative action to confront climate change. The post-2012 agreement must be global, effective, fair, with climate justice at its heart. For it is a tragic irony that the countries which have least to do and have least to and have least help cause this climate change are those which will suffer from its impact. They are also the least resourced to help their people and to take measures to protect them. The overwhelming majority of those most threatened by climate change live in the poorest countries in Asia and Africa or on small island states. Yet the world's least developed countries have contributed less than 2% of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. As we approach Copenhagen, there appears to be an emerging consensus that global emissions be cut by 50% from 1990 levels by 2050. But that's not enough. Industrialized nations need to find innovative ways to reduce emissions dramatically within the range of 25 to 40 by 2020. They have the intellectual, technological, and financial resources to do so. I therefore welcome the new Japanese Prime Minister's commitment to this end. He had indicated he will cut by 25% and hope that all the leaders in industrialized countries will follow his lead. But other countries have responsibilities too. The big emerging economies, such as Brazil, China, India, South Africa, Mexico, feel passionately that their economic prospects must not be penalized or compromised. They are right, but they too must lower emissions relative to a business-as-usual scenario. As for the least developed countries, they have, in theory, scope to increase their emissions. However, the way forward is to secure economic growth and social progress without proportionate increase in emissions. Least developed countries deserve financial incentives to benefit from the role they can play in contributing to global emissions reductions, including through sustainable land use, forest protection, and reforestation. Fairness means implementation of the polluter pays principle. This should apply to countries, to companies, institutions, as well as individuals. And by individuals, I often say that those who walk or ride bicycles need not be obliged to subsidize those who insist on driving SUVs. And there's a policy issue here which governments can do a lot about. Fairness also requires accelerated support by industrialized countries for mitigation and adaptation measures in developing countries. They need help to protect their citizens from the impact of climate change now and the inevitable acceleration of these changes in the future. This must include not just a major increase in funding in addition to existing development assistance, which are currently not always met, but also a transfer of resources, transfer of knowledge and technology to allow them to transition to low carbon economies. Issues that still need to be resolved include the cost of adaptation and how it is measured. How much more money is needed, how it will be raised, and once raised, how it will be managed and disbursed. But one thing is already clear. The sums so far committed are simply nowhere near enough. Nicholas Stern estimates that the cost of action on climate change in Africa alone will amount to 30 billion a year by 2015, rising to 50 to 100 billion a year by the 2020s, with adaptation needs taking the lion's share of that sum. So I also welcome Prime Minister Gordon Brown's support of 100 billion a year by 2020, with money coming on stream from 2013. But we are a long way yet from mobilizing the money, let alone reaching binding agreements that will provide developing countries with a predictable and sustainable level of funding. These extra funds will have to be raised from a new and innovative sources of funding, including the carbon market. So the governments have a lot to do. The private sector will have a role to play. We need to put a price on carbon, not just as a way of providing funds, but also to provide real incentives to reduce its production and consumption. The point is that leadership has never been more needed than it will be in the coming weeks and months. It needs political leaders to demonstrate vision and courage, to manage the threats and grasp the opportunities, they have to put aside narrow and sectional interest. Narrow national and sectional interest have to be set aside. Otherwise, I don't see how they can pull together and come to an agreement. Above all, we need leaders to focus on the long term and the well-being of future generations and ignore the usual electoral cycles, which all too often restrain action. Where will this leadership come from? The U.S. is the indispensable nation. China may have overtaken it as the world's biggest source of carbon emissions, but the U.S. per capita emissions are still over 4 times as big as China's and twice as high as Europe's. President Obama has said about climate change, the science is beyond dispute and the facts are clear, and that delay is no longer an option. I agree with him, and I think we all do. He has expressed his determination that the U.S. leads the world in a new era of global cooperation on climate change. It would be tragic if his willingness to lead on the global stage was undermined at home. You must help him succeed. So too must other heads of states. Each head of state or government has a responsibility to give clear instructions to their negotiators to make a deal in Copenhagen. I say this because we often hear, oh, I'm sending my negotiators. They are at the table. What's the point of sending negotiators who are at the table and negotiate and negotiate and negotiate, but never seem to strike a deal? And it will help if they are given clear instructions by their heads of states that we want action, we want an agreement. And I hope this will happen, and the heads of states will send their negotiators with clear mandates. But leadership should not be confined to politicians alone. The business sector, the U.S. corporations in particular, have a major responsibility to maximize the negative impacts, to minimize the negative impacts. They also have an opportunity to invest in clean energy and infrastructure, whether here at home or abroad, including in the developing countries. This country's genius and technological capacity means it will provide many of the advances which will help us combat climate change now and in the future. This also requires business leaders to ensure that their pursuit of profits does not result in unnecessary barriers that will prevent developing countries from accessing the knowledge and technology they need to lower the carbon emissions. And the academic world, a university like yours, can lead, as you're doing here in Colombia, by bringing different disciplines together to find solutions. Just as climate change ignores national borders, it does not stop at departmental boundaries. And as individuals, we can make contribution by the choices we make every day. We can lead by example. We can modify our behavior and our consumption patterns to reduce our carbon footprint, whether in terms of the food we eat, the transport we use, or the energy we consume. Do consider, my young friends, courses or even careers that will engage you in providing solutions to the climate challenge. Lobby your congressmen, lobby your congresswomen, and demand an ambitious, effective, and fair climate change agreement. Network through social media to inform people what can be done about climate change. Please get involved, each and every one of you. Get involved in one of the civil society and grassroots organizations that are tackling climate change, and there are many of them. Mobilize your family and friends and local community. Join the 1 million+ who have already signed up on the Tick, Tick, Tick global campaign for climate justice, launched by the Global Humanitarian Forum and GCCA, our partners in the NGO world. The campaign aims to raise awareness and demand a fair global agreement in Copenhagen. Through our actions and our voices, we can create such a noise that our leaders will not be able to ignore it, nor want to. Good leaders are also good followers. So let's push, and I assure you they will follow. But just in case you think I'm getting carried away, I have no illusion about the difficulties we have to overcome. One of the striking features of the inaugural address from General Eisenhower, when tensions were high, was his optimism. And he asked, what actually is the outlook today? In his speech, and he answered, in my opinion, far better than most of us normally judge. I share his optimism and believe in the ingenuity and determination of mankind to overcome the barriers to advancement. I believe as well, if the global community can come together to tackle climate change fairly and effectively, it can provide the basis for a new age of international understanding and cooperation. And one of the reasons for my optimism is sitting all around me in this room today. You are the first generation who can genuinely call yourselves citizens of the world. Your leadership and action will decide the health and happiness of millions of people across the globe. It is a big responsibility, but it is your world now. You must have the courage to change it for the better. I, for one, have every confidence that you are up to the task. Thank you very much. I'll stay here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Annan has agreed to respond to questions. There are microphones in each of those two aisles. You can make your way there now if you have a question to ask. We only request that you state your name and try to keep your question as brief as possible. Starting here.
Hi, Eduardo Policano from the business school. I have two brief questions. One is about...
How many questions?
Two, but very brief. On economic development, a couple of weeks ago in The Economist, someone wrote that Africa has to decrease its birth rate in order to achieve economic development. And on the other hand...
May I ask you to get a bit closer to the mic?
Yeah.
It's a bit difficult.
Yeah. So in an Economist article, it was written that Africa has to decrease its birth rate in order to achieve economic development. On the other hand, the current Pope, Benedict XVI, said that a cause of the current economic crisis is the decreasing birth rate that caused an aging population. So I wanted to get your perspective on this. Thank you very much.
Did you get it?
Your perspective on African economic development in view of its recent crisis and the declining population.
Yeah. No, I think Africa has a real challenge. Not only are we struggling to develop and meet the Millennium Development Goals, but climate change is making that task even more difficult. I referred in my comments to drought, desertification, have an impact on food production. I referred to floods and the spread of diseases. And in fact, to make our development efforts sustainable, we need to factor in the climate change and adaptation. You are right that in some African countries there has been quite a drop in population growth, often due to conflicts or health. When you take a look at the Southern African situation in a country like Zimbabwe, the lifespan has dropped by more than 10 years. And in some situations, they've lost farmers, they've lost teachers, they've lost nurses and doctors. And so it's not even a question of losing the future, but losing the present. But measures are being taken to counter this. Counter it both by the African governments themselves trying to improve governance and assistance from our foreign friends, which are also being better targeted. But there is no doubt that Africa has major challenges, and it's in fact one of the main areas we are working on is agriculture to be able to assure food security. And this is why we've launched the Green Revolution for Africa. Thank you.
Over here.
Kofi, my name is Akosia Oforiwayin. I'm a junior in the college. And you spoke about what we as students can do to help raise awareness, lobbying to our Congress people. I know there are a lot of student leaders in the audience, so I want to know what you think is the most effective way that we can raise awareness both on campus and in the New York area.
The most effective way to raise awareness.
Raise awareness.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think you need to network and work with your friends, join groups that are working on climate change. Set an example yourselves. If you can bicycle, if you can walk, if you don't have to drive, don't do it. And generally work to push the climate change issue higher up the political agenda. I think we are seeing more and more awareness, but it is not always evident. At least we've made quite a lot of progress where the science is not being challenged anymore, and everyone seems to agree we need deep cuts in greenhouse emissions. And having come to that conclusion, we now have to push for action, and I think the most urgent action is to press our leaders to give us an agreement in Copenhagen. Get them to understand that we care about the planet, we want an agreement, we want to protect it, and we want them to deliver.
Over here.
Mr. Annan, thank you for coming today. My name is Jonathan Myman. I'm a student in Columbia College. My question to you is about other countries' views of Obama and how important is it to other countries that the U.S. take a lead on climate change?
Mm-hmm. I think on President Obama, the world's reaction to his election was very favorable, very positive. In fact, as I traveled around the world, people sometimes behaved as if it was their elections. They were so engaged in the monitoring and following the U.S. elections. So I think he has generally sympathetic and favorable reactions around the world. But it goes beyond Obama. The figures I gave you about the U.S. emissions indicates that if we are going to get an agreement, the U.S. has to lead. The U.S. and the industrialized countries have to lead. If those who are responsible for historical and accumulated pollution and are today also polluting quite a bit do not take the lead, the others who believe it's now their turn to develop are not going to move. So the leadership has to come from US, Europe, Japan, and the industrialized countries. And of course, I'm also encouraging the large emerging countries to do it. So the US leadership is essential, and I'm happy President Obama has decided that he would want to lead. And given the attitude of the world population towards him, his leadership would be helpful.
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm Bashira Abdus-Sabor. I'm a graduate student at SIPA. And I have a question particularly as it pertains to Africa in terms of leadership and transparency. We've seen some leadership changes in this country, but I'd like to know your thoughts on efforts that are being made on the continent for the leaders to be more accountable to the people in terms of what happens to the aid dollars that are given and the funds that are being contributed to the continent. Thank you.
I think we are seeing some progress on that front for several reasons. We are seeing development of very active and robust civil society that is trying to keep the government on its toes. I was in Kenya last year, and I'll tell you, I was extremely impressed with the level, the organization, and the intellectual approach of the civil societies there. So there is pressure on the government. The governments are doing better in terms of governance, but there's much more that can be done. People are demanding transparency. They want to fight impunity. They want to have effective and honest security forces to protect them. And the other encouraging thing which is happening is lots of bright young men and women who have studied and worked in the US, in Europe, and others are going back. are going back and they are beginning to have an impact and make a difference. And I would want to see acceleration of generational change in Africa. If we can get the young people engaged in politics and in the corporate world and all this, we can move much faster. Look at some of the old leaders and the way they approach problems and the things they do. Young people, your generation, wouldn't even know how to go about that. It would be such a dramatic change if you were to change that generation and introduce fresh blood into politics and business. And I think it is happening, and I'm hopeful. I have one of my colleagues here, Michael Keaton. We work on the Africa Progress Panel, and basically our mandate is to encourage African governments to improve governance and fight corruption and push the G8 to honor the assistance commitments that they have made. And we are seeing progress. There's a lot to be done, but things are moving in the right direction.
We have time for 2 more questions, one from each side. But don't leave when the questions and answers are over, because there's another treat coming. Yes.
My name is Abiola Kiemi. As a Nigerian, the Rwandan genocide holds particular resonance for me. You were Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping when that genocide happened. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you do more to stop that genocide?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. Because often when we go through these crises, there's a question of why didn't the UN stop it? Why didn't the Secretary General stop it? Or why didn't the Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations stop it? And I'm looking at Jean-Marie Guéhenno, referring to peacekeeping operations. I think we have to understand, when we talk of the UN, that there are several UNs. I'm leaving the agencies, UNICEF, the UNDP, and others aside. But look at the glass house on the East River. There are 2 UNs. The UN that is made up of member states who sit in the Security Council and the General Assembly and pass resolutions, give mandates to the Secretariat headed by the Secretary General to act on it, and are expected, when they give mandates to the Secretary General or the peacekeeping operations, to come up with commensurate resources for one to be able to work. And then, of course, there's this UN that is a Secretariat that implements the decisions of the member states. In the case of Rwanda, let me put things in context. I think most people forget that Rwanda happened at a time when the international community was withdrawing from Somalia. There were thousands of troops in Somalia. U.S. Black Hawk was shot down, and the U.S. government decided to withdraw its troops. We had about 32,000 troops there. When the U.S. decided to withdraw, all the industrialized countries with the best trained troops also withdrew. I recall making a comment in New York Times at that time that the way the U.S. has withdrawn has created the impression that the easiest way to disrupt a peacekeeping operations is to kill a few peacekeepers and everybody leaves. But that's what happened. They were leaving, shocked, almost at the political level, deciding we are not going to get involved in this sort of thing in Africa. And that was when we needed troops in Rwanda. The troops were not available. In fact, President Clinton has apologized several times for having decided not to make troops available. Some governments pretended they did not know what was going on in Rwanda. But when the killing started and they found out what was going on, what did they do? Send in more troops? No. Dallaire said if he had had 5,000 troops or more, he could have done something. Several things happened. 10 Belgian soldiers were killed, and the Belgian battalion were pulled out. The the Sri Lankan battalion were given instructions to protect themselves. The half a battalion from Ghana was the only force Dallaire had. And the governments that pretended they did not know what was going on, when they found out, sent planes to Rwanda to evacuate their nationals. In that situation, the UN failed, but you must know that it's a broader UN, not that it's peacekeeping, the Secretary General or individual didn't do it. So this is the environment in which we operate. In fact, I've often talked about peacekeeping, describing the awkward situation the operations are placed in. Is that it's a bit like telling the mayor of New York, Mr. Mayor, we know periodically there is fire in New York, and you're going to need a firehouse and fire trucks. We will build you one when the fire breaks. That's the way we operate. It's when the crisis has exploded that we go around to governments looking for troops. We have no standing army. And if the governments say no, you have nowhere to turn. We've all made so much fuss about Sudan lately. We've all made so much fuss about Darfur and the need to protect the people. The peacekeeping operation there is stretched. We are dealing with a territory the size of France. You cannot have enough troops to cover the whole territory. And so you try to make up with mobility, with helicopters, with gunships, but nobody will give them helicopters. I think the operation needed 18 helicopters. For 2 years, no one has provided it. And yet we are so concerned and so desperate about protecting the people in Darfur. No one can tell me we don't have 18 helicopters in the world. There are thousands of them, but it's a question of will.
Thank you. One last and brief question, please.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Woodward. I'm a senior here at Barnard College. Thank you for speaking. Your speech really resonated with me. What I would really like to know is, given that full-time students work very hard on their course load towards their degree, both undergraduate and graduate, is there anything that the university or universities in general can do to help students get involved and to make their efforts and enthusiasm count?
I think often I'm asked the question, what should we young people do to become good global citizens? And I always tell them, begin in your community, begin at your university, begin in your own little town. If you see something wrong that you want to do something about, organize yourself with friends and take it on. It doesn't have to be something very big. In fact, sometimes what people need, if they are in difficulties, for someone to pay attention and to say, stop, this is enough, don't continue. But I think at the university level, you have lots of opportunities, you have lots of other young people who share your ideas, you have professors who can help steer you in the right directions. But I think you have to take the initiative to organize yourself, in some cases work with your professors and other students to make a contribution. I have seen young people come together on their own and do incredible things. But your question also leads to one thing which I want to share, and this is perhaps more true in developing countries and here, where lots of young people go through the educational system. They come out of the universities with a degree, an education that has no link to the needs of society, what the society requires them to do. I mean, if I take my own country, for example, sometimes I have a feeling that vocational training schools would be much better for some of the younger people and for society, where they come out with skills and trades to be able to do. But since university education is free, each parent wants the sons and daughters to have university degrees. It doesn't matter that when they come out with that degree, they may not get a job. If you were to tell them to send them to vocational training school to learn skills, they'll probably tell you it's not prestigious enough. So we need to sort of adapt our thinking as to how we prepare our young people and the contributions they make for society. And you guys should also sometimes be prepared to go and tell your professors, we think a course in this area will be very helpful for the following reasons, and can we try and work on putting it on? It has to be a dynamic relationship, and I'm sure the professors will be happy to listen to you. Thank you very much.
Would you like to sit down?
Before Kofi Annan departs, he has agreed to share with us something unusual. Next week in Paris, his Time for Climate Justice campaign will be launching a campaign song to raise awareness about the importance of a fair, binding, and global agreement at Copenhagen. I should say, this is the first time that an MTV-like video has appeared at a World Leaders Forum. So hold on to your seats. The song is a cover of Midnight Oil's 1987 hit, Beds Are Burning, and has been specially rewritten by the band to focus on the threat of climate change. It features an international selection of celebrities such as Duran Duran, Mark Ronson, Jamie Cullum, Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas, and Oscar winner Marion Cotillard, amongst many others. The song will be available as a free download starting October 1st. By downloading it, you will demonstrate your support for a deal based on climate justice at Copenhagen. This is the first time this video has been shown anywhere in public. Ladies and gentlemen, Beds Are Burning.
Tick, tick, tick. Climate change is having a real impact on the lives of individuals and communities around the world. We must do something about it. In December in Copenhagen, our leaders will have an opportunity to come up with a robust post-climate agreement that is viable and will have a
I support the campaign for climate justice, and I'm pleased to become a climate ally. This is your campaign.
On behalf of Columbia, of the Columbia School of International and Public Affairs, and all of those in our community, I want to thank Kofi Annan not only for his eloquent words, but for his indescribably effective music. Thank you.